Hello and welcome to Gnomon for another industry event live at the Dell stage. Thank you all for joining us here, and thank you for joining us at home. If you're looking for closed captioning, please head over to our YouTube or our Facebook page. We'll be able to help you there. We'd also like to take a second to thank our sponsors, Dell and NVIDIA. Without them, we wouldn't be able to provide you with amazing content as you're about to see right now. Speaking of amazing content, if you like what you see, share it. Tell your friends. I mean, tonight's going to be really amazing and very exciting, so make sure you spread the word. So, speaking of tonight, we're excited to host an early Star Wars Day event with Sideshow Collectibles. For more than 3 decades, Sideshow has helped shape the modern collectibles industry, producing more than 50 pieces each year from their campus in Thousand Oaks, California. You'll hear from Anna Van Slee, Tim Hansen, Will Harbottle, and Bernardo Escoval, who will break down how their team brings Star Wars collectibles to life. Make sure to stick around until the end of the presentation where we'll have a Q&A here for you all here. I'm sure you're familiar. And if you're trying to participate in the Q&A at home, go ahead and leave your questions in the chat. But not only do we have Q&A tonight, we also have an amazing giveaway. And again, not only for the people that are here, but also for you at home. So make sure you stay until the end of the stream. It's going to be amazing. I'm super excited. So without further ado, please help me welcome our guest artist from Sideshow Collectibles.
Hey everybody. Before we introduce ourselves and start to get into the process, we wanted to start off the evening with a little getting to know you experiment. So please, if you've seen a Star Wars movie, raise your hand. Okay, so for those of you that are not here, please keep your hand up. Sorry, we're not done yet. I promise I'll move quickly so the blood doesn't rush out. It's pretty much everyone in the room, which is good because there's going to be a lot of Star Wars talk this evening. Keep your hand up in the air if the first Star Wars movie you saw was A New Hope. Now that's episode 4, the first theatrical release. Okay, quite a few hands still in the air. Please keep them up, keep them up. Keep your hand up in the air if you were born 1995 or later. Okay, still a pretty significant number of hands up in the air. Last question, keep your hand up in the air if you saw that movie with a parent or an older sibling. Okay, still quite a few hands in there. You can put your hands down now. Thank you. The reason, aside from getting to know you a little bit, we wanted to do that kind of quiz, is that one of the key components to the Sideshow ethos is to really understand who you're designing for, who you're making a product for. It's really easy to fall in love with universes and worlds and fandoms and characters, but if you lose sight of who you're designing for, it doesn't have as much magic. And so Star Wars is really interesting. It's a generational fan base. It gets passed down from generation to generation, but a lot of people have seen their first movie with a parent, and there's an unusually high number of fans who've seen A New Hope. Now, another thing that we know about you and Star Wars fans is they love their toys, and they love trivia. So we're gonna have a couple trivia questions throughout the evening too, with some giveaways, and my first one is on theme with our kind of opening experiment here. Please raise your hand if you know the year A New Hope came out. I think you, sir, in the white long sleeve shirt were first. Chris, if you could get him with the microphone.
1977.
Yes, you are correct, 1977. You have won a Grogu.
Whoa! Nice.
You can collect him from the back table there. It says Grogu on the box.
Wow.
So, 1977, almost 50 years ago, and speaking of wonderful things that are almost half a century old, I'd like to introduce some of my wonderful colleagues that are here with me this evening. Will, why don't we start with you? Can you tell us a little bit about what you do, how long you've been doing it, and I had a different Star Wars question prepared for you, but then as we were talking before we came on stage, you shared that amazing story with me about how important it was to you. So if you wouldn't mind sharing that story as well.
Yeah. My name is Will Harbottle. I'm a sculptor at Sideshow. I've been there 11 years now. I think the story she was referring to was when I saw it, I'm old enough to have seen Star Wars in the theater when it came out that summer. and it really changed my life. It was, other than the birth of my daughter, probably the most important moment in my life, really. It changed everything. Before that, to be honest with you, I didn't want to see Star Wars. I had no interest in this, like, what is this thing with this big monkey in it or something like that? Like, that's not my speed. I wanted to see the Bad News Bears. But the Bad News Bears was sold out. So me and my friend had to go next door to see Star Wars, the monkey movie. By the end, I had never seen anything like that. I never had been exposed to such imagination. Again, I was a Little League player. I wanted to see, the baseball movie. That was my world. And the moment that those ships came over, across the screen, my life has never been the same since.
That's amazing. I don't know. I hope Zelda knows that her birth only slightly supersedes Chewbacca.
And I have to say that for political reasons, because really, it's a toss-up.
Bernardo, let's move on to you next. You are one of our painters. How long have you been painting for, and how long have you been painting at Sideshow?
Well, my name is Bernardo Escobar. I'm a painter at Sideshow Collectibles, and I've been there for 20 years. Just got my email today that I've been there for 20 years.
Congratulations.
Which is a blessing all in itself, because like him, I'm going to date myself here. So let's see, in '77, that's when Star Wars came out. I was 7 years old. My older brother took me to go see it at the Gnomon in Hollywood. And I remember walking up and seeing the footprints. They had already done the whole pre-opening thing, so I saw the footprints, Darth Vader, C-3PO, R2-D2s and stuff. We walk in, and then, like you, opening crawl, and the spaceships show up overhead, and my mouth is open. And in my head, at 7 years old, I said to myself, there is some way, one day, I'm going to have something to do with Star Wars. And lo and behold, now, we get to deal with all that stuff. So it's come full circle. But yeah, that movie just changed my life, opened up my mind, and just, made me believe in, dreams can happen, because that's what happened, right, with Lucasfilm. They were like, oh, we don't know how well it was going to do. And then after that, it was just, here we are, So yeah, it was a great experience.
Awesome. All right, Tim, we saved the best for last.
I know. Go ahead, Anna.
Do you want to
ask me something?
Can you tell us what you do and how long you've been doing that for Sideshow?
Yes. So my name is Tim Hansen. I do cut and sew costuming at Sideshow. I've been there for 17 years. I got my first gig at Sideshow just over 19 years ago. So ever since then, it's really been an amazing ride. My experience with Star Wars, unlike these dinosaurs, I wasn't born until the era called the 80s. So we grew up on things called VHS tapes. And my brothers and I would watch the Star Wars trilogy quite frequently. I got my first Star Wars theatrical experience, I guess, when they were released in '97 for the special editions. But definitely been a fan for as long as I can remember.
Awesome. And I'm Anna. I'm head of business development at Sideshow, but tonight I'm going to be your Barbara Walters, Connie Chung, whatever the host of Hot Ones is, kind of asking these guys questions and ushering us through. But my job, my joy, my privilege is I really get to bridge the worlds of business and creative, because I work with some of the best artists in the world, and they have the most amazing creative ideas, but obviously that has to make good business sense so we can keep our doors open and keep making collectibles. So I get to kind of bridge that gap. Let me tell you a little bit about Sideshow. We are headquartered just a little bit north of here in Thousand Oaks, but we're an international company. We have teams all around the world. We have a 6-scale team in Korea. We have a team of sculptors in South America. We ship to over 120 different countries worldwide. I thought about listing out all the different types of products we make, but I thought it might be better to share a video, which also gives a glimpse of our campus. And oh my gosh, this is the first time I've been to Gnomon, and just walking through the building here, I can definitely say there's some kindred spirits here tonight.
Yes.
as you can surmise from the video, we make collectibles anywhere from 6 scale up to life size. Our specialty truly is pop culture, and that spans all the different genres from superheroes and sci-fi, fantasy and horror, anime, and gaming. Last year was our 30th anniversary. It was pretty amazing. But we weren't always a collectible company. We started off as Sideshow Toy 30 years ago. Now, what is the difference between a toy and a collectible? It's just the age of the person buying it. Just kidding. We don't have any safety regulations. No, just kidding. Actually, the difference is that our products are highly detailed. They're a lot more fragile, they're more expensive, they're much more limited edition, and we really get to take our passion and fandom and creativity to a whole other level of authenticity. So, let's get down to it. Tonight we're going to walk through our product development process. And this is really kind of a high-level overview that works for toys, collectibles, and really almost any product, but this is from a high level what yields a physical prototype. And we do all this hands-on at our headquarters in Thousand Oaks. We do all of our prototyping on site. So we're going to dig in and start with design, which I'm sure is a phase that you are all familiar with. I think a lot of people think of it as, illustration, but there is a lot more to the blueprints of design. There's post studies, character design, composition, and more. But Will, why don't you tell us a little bit about the role of Sculpt in design, and when you get a design package from one of our designers, what are some of the first things that you assess about that?
It's evolving. We used to get almost exclusively 2D drawings, and we would work from those. But much more recently, as ZBrush and other things like that get so much easier to use and so much faster, we have started to design more in 3D, which is fun because it enables us to get more involved in the design part of it. So in other words, we're not just given, here, sculpt this, we're part of that process of figuring it out. And that, we make a lot better product that way, because you see it as it will be, with the collector. You see it in 3D, you see the full piece. When you only get a 2D drawing to work from, it can often happen that it works great from that angle, the hero shot, but it's not as strong all the way around. So anyway, the recent way we've been doing it, I feel like we've been doing our best work lately, partly because we're designing it in 3D a lot more. And that's not to say that the 2D isn't super helpful. They can iterate so quickly. They can, in 2D, they can give you 12 choices, and then maybe we'll sculpt a rough draft of a handful, 2 or 3 of those, and see them in 3D, work out some of the kinks, and choose our favorites.
And that gets passed back and forth a lot, right?
Yes.
I've seen you do a block out, and then the designer might draw on top of it, and you might change the
100%.
thing. And
Yeah, 100%. And licensors still understand 2D better, so sometimes we'll work out everything, but then we'll still submit to the licensor the 2D version because that's what they're familiar with reacting to. Just the way it is.
And you're making production consideration decisions early on
100%.
too, so you might run that
100%.
past one of the project managers if we're going to need a steel rod, if you've got someone levitating, or magnets if we're going to use the force, right?
Yes, 100%. Is it going to be too fragile? Is it going to be too top heavy or too front heavy? And all these, real world considerations. We also, as part of sculpting in the design process, we have our own printers in-house, and so we often will print out maybe a scale version quickly, or oftentimes we'll print out the whole full-size thing because let's say you're working on a Hulk or something that's huge. You don't appreciate how big these things are going to be until it's sitting on the table in front of you. And a Hulk, can just be crazy. And so you can make choices. Okay, wow, that's really neat, but we might have to dial the base back a little bit or whatever. And again, those are decisions that we can now make early. Because, boy, you don't want to make them late.
And speaking of early decisions, Tim, bringing you in on this. So we have to decide early on whether something's going to be fabric or sculpt. And I
Yes.
think we have Obi-Wan behind us on the screen.
Yes,
and
yes.
capes are a big point of, there's a lot to consider between fabric or sculpt. Can you guys speak to some of the debates that you have when we're deciding whether to sculpt a cape or do a fabric cape?
Yeah, of course. That all takes place in the design phase. We get a character, something we want to do, and then we'll look through different designs, and we'll determine. Oftentimes, if it's a film character in particular, or television, we tend to go that way when recreating costumes. Assets are completely different for that, and that's way more helpful for actually creating these things in real fabric. So, but also there's a lot of other things to consider, of course. Is there movement involved? Where's the setting of the character? Is there something it needs to suspend or hold? How is it going to make through production? All of these things need to be considered very early on, so we know not only in 2D, but then when it gets to 3D, we'll know how to break a figure down, which is a process in itself when we're putting actual fabric on there.
Another thing that I never would have thought of before I got to Sideshow is packaging. You know, you can have a really cool, giant, sculpted cape, maybe,
Yep.
but if it doubles the package size, it makes it so that no one can own it. And I don't think people appreciate how significant a factor that can be sometimes.
Yeah, yep, good point.
You can make a fabric cape flat.
Let's switch to talking about reference, but before we do, quick trivia moment. Show of hands, do you know the name of this character? I think I saw the gentleman in the baseball hat over here with the glasses by the pole was the first hand up.
Let's see.
Greedo.
Oh, yes. Please help yourself to a Grogu, sir. So, Bernie, next question for you. Reference. Obviously, when we're doing a character like Greedo, we're going to get reference from licensor, which will include, open lit studio shots. You're going to have the audience's image of what they saw online, which might have darker, smoky cantina lighting. There's also, movie posters and renderings that, capitalize the imagination. When we're in the design phase and you're consulting on paint, where do you net out for which reference to go with? How do you decide and guide that interpretation early on?
So first and foremost, we're collaborating with each other. Design and paint, sculpt, but we're all there, and we're fans of this stuff. So we want to get it right. So we're going to look at film reference, like you said, and then there's the behind-the-scenes shots, which that stuff is older, so it's a lot of it's very desaturated and stuff. So we basically have to go with what everyone remembers on screen. So that's what we go for. We shoot for that, and we try to get as close as we can to getting the colors right and the fabric down and whatnot. But yeah, reference is a big key part, and we kind of have to break it down. And then it comes into actually a committee when we all have to kind of agree, like, okay, this is actually what we see, this is what we're going to go for, and licensor has to approve. So it's always going through the licensor phase. So as much as we want to call the shots, it's, well, this is what it's going to be, or this is not what it's going to be. So, we adjust and we go from there. So it's reference is the key.
Yeah.
And sometimes we're technically less accurate, right? I've heard long-winded debates about Michael Myers' jumpsuit, what color, or Blondie's poncho, and sometimes the actual true color of the artifact is not what people imagine, and so we have to consciously go with kind of what's more in the popular imagination.
Right. Yeah.
All right, let's move on to Sculpt next. And let's start with like a good baseline. Will, can you talk about some of the programs that you and the other people in the Sculpt department use?
I'm a big fan of Maya. That's the way my brain works. It's, I like numbers, and I like to be able to do things procedurally and stuff like that. So I definitely use Maya every day. All my rough sculpts are, built there. I pose in Maya, but I couldn't do what I do without ZBrush. ZBrush is where things can really come alive, as you all know. But I'm a junkie for everything. I get every plugin that I can find. I try every program that comes along. I've recently really fallen in love with Marvelous Designer, which is the cloth simulator. And oh my goodness, yeah. But really, every day is spent, the majority of it, in Maya and ZBrush, and the most hours in ZBrush.
And And then stepping outside of that, and we were just showing some images of our Sculpt room. Can you talk a little bit about the physical environment and the importance of that and the atmosphere that you all have created?
Oh, you mean being in the studio?
Yeah.
We were given the opportunity to sort of build our studio out and the budget and everything like that. So we took, and the time, we were given a week to build out our space. And it's exactly what we all wanted. We kind of were, I mean, we don't know physical, real world, architecture things, so we did our best, but we were shooting for kind of a Nostromo feel, so it's really dark and it's got the lighting, and we each have our little cubicles and stuff. So it is very, very, very inspiring. What we were thinking about is we're going to spend a good chunk of our lives in this room, and it needs to be a place that we really want to be. We have, like, the ambient sound is all Nostromo engine room sounds, and the bridge sounds, like, Mother, the computer sounds, all that. It's just playing in the background all day long. People say, don't you get annoyed? And I'm like, no, I love that. It's so quiet when I go home. Like, I want, where's Mother? Let's go. Anyway, so as you guys know from a place like this, your surroundings so much affects your state of mind and your enthusiasm and all that.
Environment is so
Yeah.
important to that creativity. Yeah. From a high level, you sculpt all different sorts of projects, right? You have, males, and that includes like the Hulk and giant distorted male anatomy. You have female characters. There's creatures. There's, what we call hard surface modeling, right, which is like armors and vehicles.
Robots.
There's robots, light effects, and smoke. Do you specialize? Does the team have different specialties, or is everyone kind of a generalist? How do you approach that?
Most of the sculptors we work with do tend to specialize a little more. I never got that great at any one thing, and so what I can contribute is being decent at a lot of things. I've done character likenesses, which are very challenging, of course, robots, males, females. I haven't done too many monsters. I've done a handful, so that's probably the area that I have the least experience in. But I tend to do mostly female sculpts. That's kind of, if I do have a specialty, that's probably it.
I think you're legendary in that regard.
But most people specialize, and really, you can go either way, obviously.
Did you try your hand at all those different ones before you stumbled upon sort of your passion and talent and where that intersected? Do you say that's like a normal kind of creative path of development for a sculptor?
I probably, circumstantially either had to or needed to do what was available, and therefore got to try a lot of different things. And I tend to fall in love with whatever I'm sculpting, partly just because I need to. I have to be really passionate about what I'm working on. I'm working on it for 2 or 3 months, so I even if I don't know much about the piece or the character or whatever, I need to get familiar. So the first thing I do is like get the books or buy the comic books or watch the movie or whatever. I mean, the best story about that is Voltron. I don't know Voltron. Voltron is way after my time, but the art director came to me and really wanted me to do Voltron. He's just like, I see you doing this Voltron. You're good at hard surface. You like the personality of it. And I was like, dude, I'm not sure I'm the guy for this. I mean, like, this is
a robot man.
This is a robot made out of cats, man. I mean, like, what is this thing? Anyway, so he talked me into it. No, you can do it. By the end, it was super challenging. One of the hardest sculpts I've ever did because it's just so complicated. I mean, it's a robot made out of cats.
But the piece was a total hit, and it
Yeah,
came out
it turned out okay.
amazing.
Anyway, but by the end, I fell in love with it. I was so into it. I'm like, this is a robot made out of cats, man. Anyway, so.
That should be their logo tagline. I like that.
Sorry
I
to all the
watched that
Voltron
show.
fans.
So being a great sculptor isn't just technical skills. There's a lot of communication. It's such a key point in the development process. You're talking to lots of different departments. You have to be a good communicator too. can you talk a little bit about, maybe provide some advice about being a good communicator and getting your creative vision across and maintaining that integrity, but also, getting along with your coworkers.
Yeah, that's the
and
key,
help the
really,
project.
is if you're a total pushover, that's not necessarily going to serve you, super well. But you also can't be the person that no one wants to work with. So that balance is tricky. I mean, you have to stand up for yourself. No, I'm really pretty sure that we need to do it this way. But there are times when, but we're not doing it that way. And that
Is it hard to take creative feedback sometimes, and how have you dealt with that over your career, especially when something, like you said, you're in love,
yes.
it's your baby, so.
That's extremely challenging. You just have to
You just cry quietly, right?
take a walk. Definitely I had to take a walk or two in my career. That's part of the balance again.
Just kind of keeping that in mind.
The easiest way to put it is just be cool, man. I mean, like, I've never met anybody professionally who was so good at what they did that they could get away with being an a-hole. It's hard to do. You're gonna burn that last bridge and be all by yourself, no matter how good you are.
That's true. Let's switch gears and going from sort of the soft skills to the hard technical skills of what we do, because obviously these then become physical in the next phase. So can you talk a little bit about, as opposed to video games or animation, when you're working in ZBrush or Maya and designing a character, what are the considerations that you have to have that this is going to be a physical, real-world piece?
Yeah, a lot of us came from traditional backgrounds. I mean, I know I did. I spent many years sculpting in clay and wax and stuff like that, and that helped. But we always need to keep in mind this thing has to exist in the real world. It's got to be able to balance. It can't be too fragile. It can't be, complexity is almost, strangely, with the advent of digital sculpting and 3D printers, complexity really became free for most things. In a movie, it doesn't make any difference how complicated the character is sometimes, because why not? In our world, it still does matter. You can have a piece that's made out of 150 small things that all have to plug in, but it's not practical. And no one wants to make something that people can't have. I mean, part of the fun of what we do is we get to make stuff that people put on their shelves and bring home and fall in love with. They have to fall in love with it because these things aren't cheap. So making it possible for them to own it is something we really need to think about too. And well, I can see it on your screen. That picture there, it's an example of pushing it pretty far. I have a bad habit of pushing things pretty far when it comes to complexity. I definitely do.
We need that, though, because obviously you're living with a piece in your living room and you're going to see it from all angles all the time. It's not just when it's on your screen or when you're playing the game. And so to have the little detail in the back of like, oh, there's a little scuff on the butt where Grogu used to sit. I mean, those are the sorts of things that you need to think about and incorporate into the piece.
And it's the fun part, actually. Yeah, I mean, really. Oh, wow, as you say, his shoes are worn in a certain way because he, walks with bow legs or whatever, you know what I mean? Like, that's the fun part. To bring the story into it. I was a writer for many years, and I have been surprised by how much story I can bring in to sculpts. I didn't expect that when I transitioned into being a sculptor. I thought, well, okay, those days are behind me. But I found out that it's a storytelling of a different kind, and it's actually what I'm more suited for. It's immediate storytelling. Like you get the entire story in a shot. When we have stuff on the tables at Comic-Con or whatever, people walk by and they know everything in a glance. And when you're writing a book or something like that, which is what I was trying to do, you're asking somebody to spend weeks or days, weeks, however long it takes to read a big book, and you don't know the story until you get to the end. It's just a very different way. The immediate story, much more suited to me, especially as I get older.
And so engineering, obviously also thinking about the practical conglomeration there. Is that something that you keep in mind throughout? Or you're like, I'll figure out how this pocket's going to key in later? Or do you need to kind of figure out the technical stuff as you're designing the story of the piece?
Life is a lot easier for everybody on the team if we're thinking about it all along. Because you can let it roll on down the line and, okay, we'll deal with that later. But the painters and the costumers and the cast and molders and people who deal with the printing, they definitely appreciate it if it's part of the process all the way. And you get a better product.
And
If you're
sometimes
thinking
we've had
about
to go back and re-engineer things.
way too often, yeah. You don't want to do that.
Moving on to the next phase, prototype and model prep is really when we go from ZBrush into the real world. And it's the mold and cast department I'm always in awe of. It's kind of like a dentist's office. It's a little bit creepy and terrifying with all these like blue molds everywhere. And this is a gross overgeneralization, but typically that involves a 3D printed output, which we then clean up, that we then physically mold and cast, that then gets cleaned up again, then assembled, and then goes on to Bernie. But I did want to talk about this a little bit. And Will, with 3D printing, when you're printing from ZBrush, we do need to go back in and obviously get rid of build lines, but we're putting detail back in. How much actual hand sculpting to bring back the fidelity of the original file occurs? Can you talk a little bit about that? And I know that's probably changed over time, too.
Yes, that's what I was going to say is 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 2 years ago, it was very different than it is now. The printers now, the fidelity of the printers is so amazing that it's less necessary to rebuild anything. It's a lot more focus on cleanup because there's still the build supports, and even the best printers in the world have build lines that need to be softened. The difference, the thing is our stuff is so detailed and oftentimes so big, and people are living with it in their faces. I mean, it's not, you're not going to see it you're not seeing these things on TV or from a distance. People live with these things, and so, it has to look good that close. I actually can't see that close anymore. But yeah, so they do, our team does an incredible job restoring what the intent was. Is a lot more what's going on now, cleaning it up,
Okay, we're going to take another little trivia break. And this is more of also just
Get your hands
sheer
ready.
curiosity. How many of you have actually physically molded and casted a sculpture before?
Right. Oh,
Oh my God,
okay.
that's amazing. That's way more hands than I thought it would be. I brought books, but not that many for all of you. I'll have to take some names after. If you come see me, I'll get your name and we will give you a Star Wars book, because molding and casting, as you know, is not easy, and that we wanted to just reward you guys for doing that, because that's incredible. So, well done. That's awesome. And then, Will, I wanted to ask you the same question. When you physically mold and cast something, how much cleanup then goes into the piece after you've got your, resin?
Depends a lot on the mold maker, and we have really, really good mold makers, so there's less cleanup necessary than there might otherwise be. But yeah, that's a whole other stage. And again, the idea really, the theme is to restore it to the intent of the design, of the sculpt, what we've all are shooting for, and to keep it throughout the process, all the way through overseas and wherever it might pass through, keeping it at that level, for all of us, that's a big consideration.
So Bernie,
Yeah.
the piece is headed to you next.
Yes.
And the next stage is really assembly of that piece. Can you talk a little bit about your role in that, how you prepare it to accept paint? Like what are some of the preparations that go in along with the prototype assembly before you start to primer it and get going?
So obviously it comes from the cleanup guys. Amazing crew, great guys. So we get it, and it'll be 2 pieces. So if it's a Cat of Bane, 2 full pieces, Cad Bane with, how many parts would you say? You know, a lot of parts. So we got to consider all that, put it together. We'll sit with the project manager and whoever else, and we'll sit there, put it together, see how it goes, see if there's any collisions that might be happening. So that's where, you know, we talk about like, okay, this is not going to work, or how is this going to work? And, you know, we'll work at pinning it then, making sure that it can go together, so when it gets to paint, then we put the primer on there, then we prep it for paint. But a lot of it is putting it together, making sure it fits, because a lot of times, you know, we got to make sure the integrity of the piece is there, there's no collisions, and that the fit is right, and that it just looks right, and that it needs to stay up the way it's intended to be. So a lot of engineering is going involved at that time too. So yeah, it's a lot of going back.
Sorry.
No,
How
go
much
ahead.
do you go back and forth with the team if a piece doesn't fit right, or like key in?
Not, well, like he was saying, the advent of digital printing, you know, before it was, sometimes we'd have to sit there, and sometimes we'll sit there and fill it with epoxy and fix it that way, so it doesn't have to go back. But a lot of times it's, oh, let's reprint this, okay, let's get it, we'll get it adjusted, and then, you know, the printers are so quick now, you know, it's just so fast to get a test really quick, and it makes our job easier, because now we don't have to wait, and, you know, but at the same time, we're building and making sure everything fits right, and that it looks good, you know.
Are there any considerations you have to take with glue when you're assembling and putting it together and taking apart? Any tips or tricks there?
Yeah. So, you know, we have glue, we have a zip kicker, we have epoxy putty. So a lot of that stuff is, it's a lot of, as much as everything, there's a lot of new stuff and new technology coming out, it still goes back to glue and armature wire and pinning. It's so crude still. It's very old school effect kind of building. You know, it's model building basically is what we're doing. We're building a model. Then we have to consider it for paint. So I got to consider how it's gonna, you know, I'm gonna have the torso separate from the legs, and then, you know, we're gonna add, highlights and shading and the color, base color. So everything's considered, and it's basically at that point is a maquette, like you would say what they use in the movie industry, right, or effects. So that's what we're basically building.
All right, we're going to hear more about paint in just a minute, but before we leave the stage, Tim, I wanted to ask you, now when you get an assembled prototype, it looks very different than when Bernie does, because obviously you're going to be putting some clothes on it. Can you talk a little bit about how it's different, some of the things that you consider when you're looking at that assembly, and how it's going to work with your costuming?
Yeah. Well, this was a really pivotal move as far as technology is concerned, and the advent of ZBrush and so much 3D printing. It's remarkable getting things this in advanced now, where before, you know, many years ago, we'd have a sculptor do it, even in clay or wax. We go through the mold cast process, and Bernardo and myself would get our copies and start our processes at the same time. Now, though, once we get, we're through the 2D phase, we can, and we'll touch on this also, or kind of have body mock-ups where if they're matching close enough to what the final sculpt is going to be, then they're able to get me a 3D print as soon as possible. So then I can begin my process well in advance of this thing being a finalized prototype, or even finished being painted or even sculpted. So that technology alone has changed the job so drastically in the past few years. It's really been very helpful. But of course, the big difference, of course, is that mine don't have any clothes on it. So I definitely want to, I got to be responsible for that. Beautiful Leia right there. But you guys can see kind of how she's broken down also in the keys and her arms. And that part of the process is really important too, and something to understand, although not with Leia specifically, but a lot of our characters, we're posing them, of course, so it can't be a hindrance with clothing at all on there. So the way they have to be broken down and keyed has to be considered also well in advance, so I'm even able to dress these things in the first place. I'm putting these things together as I'm dressing them, if that makes sense. But so these things have to come apart like a 3D puzzle and then be able to go back together. For my process, Bernardo was talking about old school techniques and using armature wire, which we still do, because I'm using, you guys familiar with filament printers? Okay, that stuff sucks. Okay, let's be honest with you. But I do have the shape I'm able to use, so I'll usually use magnets or something a little more delicate where I can keep the body together while I'm doing my initial patterning phase.
What are some of the conversations, Will and Tim, that you guys have when you're working on a character, and I can't think of a Star Wars one, Zatanna from DC is coming to mind, where a character's wearing fishnets or stockings
Yep.
or something that's skin tight but ends at a seam line.
Yep.
I mean, that fabric has to tuck in. What's the type of conversation you guys have when you have an intersection between sculpted pieces and fabric that's going to need to go in there?
Yeah, no, I think that Zatanna is actually that's a good one, because she was partially, she had and again, we determined early on, some garments are going to be fabric, some of them are better off sculpted. And that's for various reasons: production, fit on the body, comic book stuff. You really want to aesthetically be as pleasing as possible, and realistically, fabric doesn't really stick to abs that way, So for Zatanna, we were able to make a really cool coat over her beautifully sculpted bodice, and then she had these fishnets, which are always a blast to figure out sculpturally. But there has to be something there, right? So that the legs need to pull off in the exact right spot, and then the channels. We have to make special channels in the back to actually physically hide the seam of the costume itself. So there's really a lot of little, over time we've developed so many different ways of hiding or fixing or kind of trapping where the fabric will go when it comes to a collision with actual sculpted costume.
I know in that piece in particular, I remember I just asked him, tell me what you need. I'll give you what you need, because I don't know. I can't. I don't have experience with that. And so he did. He said, okay, can you taper the thigh as it passes into her pelvis, in a certain way? And can you give me a channel? It needs to be this wide. It needs to taper like that. I'm like, perfect. Just tell me what you need, man.
And that channel was the seam line
Yes.
for the fabric.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Which is
Yeah.
genius.
Genius,
The solution
yeah.
of that
There's no
is
easy
really
way to
worked
hide
out
it.
well.
Thank you very much.
And you can't paint fishnets. Yeah, they have to be.
It's very difficult.
They have to be
Yeah.
cut and sew. You can't have tight. You can do it, but you wouldn't be able to sell it.
Painting would be a
That
blast.
piece stands out in my mind. You guys probably, I don't know if you remember this emergency meeting, but we had a licensor note where they wanted us to adjust the
right.
bottom
I'm
of
like,
her,
nope.
her bodice. And they're like, oh, can you just move it down? And we're like, no, because the fabric tucks in to the leg, and the leg is holding up the body.
It's
and
a
it
whole
was
Everything
thing.
is
you know,
built
like this
around.
cascade of things that,
exactly. I remember that.
go into
I was
that.
like, nope,
ah.
it's too late. She's like, Dan's like, well, can you explain why it's too late? And I'm like, oh yeah. And I remember writing this email. It's like, because all of this is built around the part you want me to change.
Yes.
That you approved already, by the way, in the in the design phase.
That was a fun one. All right, Bernie, let's talk about some paint. Can you just give us an overview of your process and how is there a general way that you approach every project when you're gearing up?
Yeah, so first and foremost, go through design. That's got to get approved. So now we have our walking papers. It's already been, my job is there to execute what design and what the licensor has approved. So, we get the paint over, which is a digital paint, the Sculpt. So it's already been painted over, which has been approved for color and whatnot from licensor. We get that, we look it over, we put it together, then we start talking about, I start coming out with, mixing my colors and how's it gonna look on your shelf, on a customer's shelf, with lighting, directional lighting. We like to do that now. That's been a big thing we've been doing for a long time and pushing that. But yeah, it's basically getting the concept and executing what has been given to me, so that, because we're all fans of this stuff, but a lot of it is going back and forth, whether it be if it's going to have cut and sew or, with design, this might not work, but so there's a lot of trial and error, but a lot of it is priming first, mixing up our base colors, working in layers. I do that a lot. It's like we talk about how we start off both at the same time, because there's two pieces. Remember, we got to paint the prototype and the factory copy that goes overseas, and so we got to do two. So we get those.
Why do we need to?
Well, one's a prototype for solicitation, and then the paint copy is sent
So
over
we
to the
keep
factory.
one, and the factory gets
Yes.
one. Gotcha.
And then so that's the purpose for that. But a lot of it is making sure we get that right, and making sure we get all that together. Then it gets approved. So yeah.
Can you dig in a little bit more and tell us about how that process might change for portraiture? Portraiture is like notoriously the most difficult expert level of painting.
Yes, portraits are, especially likenesses, right? So if you're dealing with, let's say, can we say Obi-Wan Kenobi, and you know, we have the Mythos figure there. That was 2 portraits. So that was Alec Guinness from, you know, the original trilogy, and then we have Ewan McGregor here. I think we have it on screen, yeah. So that right there was, you know, we all love these characters, and they're embedded in our, if we're fans, it's embedded in our head, so it's reference. And we got to make sure not only that the sculpt is there, which amazing, phenomenal sculpt work on this piece, and making sure that we get the reference we need, which is, you know, you have Alec Guinness back from in the day, and what he would look like if he was, you know, Mythos. So this was a Mythos line, a what if kind of a story.
Yeah, do you wanna, that's a good way. Yeah, what if is perfect.
Yeah.
It's kind of between off movie moment. Well, not anymore, but at the time.
Right, right. So then, you know, then you have Ewan McGregor. So a lot of that was getting reference, but in the film, and a lot of, you know, when you're looking up these pictures and getting reference, a lot of it is in film stuff. So a lot of it's desaturated. So a lot of the stuff I would get would be behind the scenes stuff. And so you'll see it there. Like there's a picture that I picked out that I had that I'll ramp up the contrast and the highlights and stuff, so we see what else is there. Like there's sunburn on his flesh, you know. So, but we also got to get the nuances of the actors, you know, the characters that we see, and make sure those are there and accentuate the sculpt that's already there. My job is just to make sure it looks like him, which is, you know, it goes in back and forth. We got to make sure it goes through a committee, you know, it goes through all of us. Actually, it's nice to have, you know, a team that we work together, you know. We got to take like, nah, it's not looking like him, so we got to go back to the drawing board.
Back to sculpt oftentimes
And
when it
back
comes
to
to
sculpt,
portraits.
yeah, because a lot of times I'll be painting, it's like, it's not there, man, something's off. And, you know, we'll go back to the drawing board and make sure it's done right, because that's our first
You
and
can't
foremost.
tell when it's unpainted. I mean,
Right.
even on ZBrush, even when it's digitally painted,
Right.
when it comes
So-
to likenesses, you just can't tell until it's painted by.
Right, so we'll go through like maybe 2 copies, if that. With,
Yeah,
you know,
maybe.
with
Like,
recent stuff.
recently, I know, we've done a bunch of
Recently, it's like, I think 6.
7, I think we hit 7.
Stay tuned for Sunday.
So yeah, I mean, it's a process, but you know, at the end of the day, my job is there to get my walking papers and execute what's given to me, and that right there alone is, I'm very proud of the work that we can do, because we've given a job that, you know, check my ego at the door. We've talked about this.
Yeah, but you bring so much more than that to it as well. I mean, like when you walk through the paint room, you know what you've painted. I mean, like you bring yourself to it. So
we all have our little something that we bring to the table, our little niche, and one of those is being nerdy enough to care and really focus in on a character and looking at the details, you know, because that's my pride and joy. I may nerd out and I may like, dude, the details, like, pull back, you're going in. It's like, but you know what? I think that's what brings it to the next level, you know.
Can you talk about lighting and how obviously you're painting highlights and shadows, you have actual sources of light on a collectible in the room, but then you also have the light in the scene. What do you think about and how do you balance those different elements when you're painting a piece?
So, you know, it's going to differ if it's a sculpted piece or if it's going to have fabric elements. So with that, we already know, well, lighting we really can't control.
And wait, can we make a point? You paint on fabric too.
Yeah, sometimes, but you know, yeah. So you know, once the piece has again been designed and approved by licensor, and we have the lighting effect there, that's our job now, is to, you know, we get the angle of the hero shot, the way the piece is supposed to be, how we would like to have it set on the shelf, right, or how it's supposed to look at the customer. So our job now is to go in and add the lighting, so when it sits on your shelf, it looks like, you know, it's a graphic, like it's coming out of your comic book, right? Mm-hmm. So a lot of it is, I'll turn off my light, and then we have, you know, I'll take a picture and see how the light's hitting it. So a lot of it is going back and forth. And
what's the light setup at your desk like?
What's that?
What's the light setup at your desk like? Do you have a particular bulb you like?
A lot.
A lot.
But a lot of times I can't rely on light as well, because it will there'll be too much, so now you overcompensate. So a lot of it is turning off my light, taking a picture, looking at that, and seeing how everything goes, because sometimes light can distort, especially LEDs or whatever, if you have warm lighting or cool lighting. And a lot of it is I'll be walking around the room, different places actually, and going and looking at it and having different eyes put on it, because I can say it looks a certain way, but a lot of times, you get lost and you go in that rabbit hole. So a lot of times you need to step back, have a set of eyes on it. But yeah, a lot of it is collaboration, because sometimes I could think like, oh, this is looking great, but a lot of times you gotta get another opinion. But the lighting for sure is a big part, because you want to make sure it looks right in front of the customer, and in front of us, because we're fans as well. So we got to make sure it looks good before it gets approved.
So we have a picture up here now. You were saying you paint 2 of every prototype, somehow magically almost exactly alike by your painting in layers and a lot of the techniques you've talked about. And one of those goes to our manufacturing partners. Can you talk a little bit about the role of digital in what you do? Even though it's very physical, there's obviously a lot of communication that needs to happen around the paint, people that aren't in the room with it, and how do you manage that?
Yeah, so the digital aspect is, a lot of it now is, we did have the concept art, but now that a lot of us is done in ZBrush, and we have the digital file, the Sculpt, they do a paint over that. So we have the concept artists or the designers that will paint and design. They'll do a paint over on the actual Sculpt. That is the file, and then we have that file, on record, so that way it can easily go to the factory as well, and then they'll but most of the time we do the copy. We look at, everything's already been established. So I can go in and try to, my job is not to change anything as much as is executed on the digital file that's been given us, that's already been approved. So, that's already been established at that point, so.
Awesome. All right, Tim, it's time to talk costuming. So if I take one of your patterns, like say I want to be Obi-Wan for Halloween, can I just size that up and go?
I wouldn't recommend that. No, I don't think I don't think that would work out so well for you. Well, with Obi-Wan in particular, like I was saying earlier, my job is costuming to a pose, essentially. So oftentimes, obviously, there's a lot of different posing things we can do, museum-type poses where characters kind of more up and down, or a lot of times we like to do action, and my job is to kind of carry through as much of that action as possible with the clothing. So a lot of times my patterns can look a little funky because I'm trying to clothe out. Sorry, I got something in my eye right now. I'm really emotional.
You're tearing up because you think of all the work you do in drafting patterns twice,
He's
right?
that good. He's realizing it right now.
Thank you. Sorry. Okay. Anyway, so yeah, I think that's kind of the nuance that people don't realize. It's not really just sizing down a real pattern. It's a good place to start, but I always have to kind of evolve that. And again, at scale, we're dealing with like a half an inch, a quarter inch, an eighth of an inch. Very, very small things where just shifting things over enough will make it look correct. I'm really not crying. I'm sorry, guys.
Oh, I have a quick question for you, Tim.
I will. Yeah. What's going on?
I've never asked you this, and I've always been curious. Very rarely do you send a piece back to Sculpt because the legs are different lengths.
Yes.
But as a sculptor, I know the legs are different lengths all the time
yes.
because it just happens either through accident or because of the pose, or we need it for one reason or another. You're obviously aware that we did that. How do you compensate without sending it back to us? Because you could just say, hey man, can you make the leg? Can you give me a little more thigh here?
Yeah, of course, yeah. Well, again, that goes back to, man, I'm a mess today. All right, anyway. It goes back to the pose. Of course, obviously when you're sculpting, a character is stepping forward, their legs actually can be different lengths without realizing it, and then I'll come across it there. But you realize as you're pinching and pulling an anatomy, and sometimes we got to push that just a little bit further. So with costuming, oftentimes I'll have a left side that's doing something and then a right side that's doing something completely different. And that's just a way of, I mean, ideally, the full package, once you look at it, everything looks like it's where it's supposed to be. A character wearing a pair of pants, I can't just do left and right side symmetrical because that ends up really twisting and turning in very strange positions. So then I'll go back, we'll start out, and then start shifting and moving all those things. So I will find ways to compensate for left and right sides, and it really just depends on what the character's doing. My job is really to enhance, and you know, again, especially as I'm walking through the halls back here and I see, you know, we have so many beautiful clay sculptures that I'm sure several of you guys have done, and there's like simulated fabric on there with clay. Like it's really awesome to see all that stuff. But actually using textiles to create these things and how the patterning has to shape to the form that way. It's not something that, you know, we would really have to think about. I think even digitally, there's a lot of pushing and pulling, and if you were to actually pull that back out, it would look very bizarre, you know, when all is said and done. But again, my job is really to, and again, one of the best compliments I can get when we were at Comic-Con, people would look at a piece and not be able to tell if it was a sculpted or a costume piece. And to me, that means a lot because at scale, like our minds are, it's kind of strange to wrap your head around the fact that this is all layers of fabric and clothing on there. But that's kind of like what it is. And over the years, the techniques have changed and developed, and I like to, you know, especially with a character like Obi-Wan here, this was like a dream project to work on for me, but he's got so much flow and movement there that, you know, putting wires in certain areas to kind of help sell that messaging as well. Like, it's all a really fascinating part of doing cut and sew on a miniature scale.
There's a saying in actually UX design that good design is invisible, which means that if you've done a good job with your design, the user won't notice you know, they'll be focused on the experience and they won't notice the flow. And I think that applies to what you do really well. You've mentioned seam length, obviously, being one of those major differences, but can you tell us about a few of those other details that you think about and need to scale so that when someone is looking at one of our pieces, they're not, you know, seeing a Barbie snap at the neck, basically?
Right. Yeah, we try to steer clear of those things. You know, again, costuming at scale is really trying to take this art, miniaturize it, and make it line up in sync with the sculpt and the piece. Working on Star Wars pieces, of course, has been an absolute dream, and those all have kind of incredible challenges to figure out how we're going to replicate these things. Oftentimes, from reference also, we'll get packages from Lucasfilm, for example. Sometimes we'll have swatches to work from. And then begins the process of, you know, how do we scale this thing down? You know, how can we make Kylo Ren's outfit? Can I find something? Do we have to print it? There's really quite an elaborate process that goes into that. And then, of course, texture plays a huge role. And then even beyond that, with Bernardo, we can talk about adding paint effects like physical weathering stuff. And again, that's all kind of inclusive in the piece to tell the story of where the character's out, what their journey's been like. You know, we're all part of like this kind of storytelling aspect that where all of our arts come together to create this one unified thing.
Another thing that's really important to what you do is posing the fabric. And I think we have a short video of that here next. Like you mentioned, you put wires in there, and usually you select more than one. What are some of the things that you're considering, some of the reference you look at when you come up with the poses, and then the variations on the pose as well?
Yep, yes. Mace is a wonderful example. As you guys know, this is the 20th anniversary of Revenge of the Sith. I don't know if any of you guys have seen it. Yes, that's it right there. So that energy, you think in that moment when we're finally coming around to do Mace Windu,
We did that.
We did that, yeah, of course. This was really exciting for us. But one was deciding on that pose. Obviously, everybody who's seen the film knows exactly what that moment is and what we're trying to capture. So there's a lot of frenetic energy that's happening there. And again, the only way to make that work was to sell that through the clothing once we decided we wanted to do a full cut and sew costume on it. So it was a real thrill to bring that to life. But a lot of that comes down to wiring, different levels of wire, how I'll line his cloak, for example. There's all kinds of different considerations I have to make when thinking about, okay, here's this moment. We want the collectors to have this moment as well. We want you to be able to replicate and do the same pose. So as I'm posing it, I'm always thinking like, okay, once a person receives this, you know, how are they going to address this? What can they do with it? And really the posing options are limitless, honestly. And that's kind of the beauty of my job. And I really appreciate, obviously, you know, Comic-Con is one thing, having face-to-face interaction with fans, but also seeing online people will receive these pieces and they love them and they'll kind of make their own thing. Everything comes out like really unique, and it's all down to the collector and kind of how you're feeling. It can change and you can alter it any way you want to, and I think that really is it's a really gratifying piece to be a part of and to kind of and be able to interface with our collector community also. So, and they'll be proud to show off what they've done, and I just think it's a really exciting thing to connect with people on.
All right. Up next, we want to talk a little bit about our graphic arts department, which is really engaged kind of throughout the entire process. They're primarily responsible for packaging and photography, but also a lot on our statues themselves. Quite a few things are decals, like you can see the icons on helmets. A lot of times eyes are decals, base art. As we're going through a project, how do you guys decide what is going to be sculpted versus what will be a graphic that will be printed and applied to the piece?
It's conversation, and it's hopefully something that you figure out early on, or at least during the process. Because obviously, if it's not going to be a decal, it has to be indicated in some way, because these things have to be reproduced multiple times, and you can't have like such, you know, a logo or something like that kind of drifting around. So we'll have to, in other words, we have to sculpt it in. If we're not going to put a decal, we have to sculpt it in. Oftentimes we'll consult the painter. What would you rather have? What's possible? Can you paint this? Would you rather have it be a decal? So that would be a conversation that we would have.
Right, yeah. Yeah, a lot of times too, because especially dealing with, obviously, Star Wars, we all love that, right? And we want everything to look exact. We want to represent exactly what everyone has seen on screen. So we try to do what, you know, like what the props would be like.
Yep.
So it's researching all that. And then, you know,
If it was a decal in the movie, then we're going to make it a decal.
Then we're going to make it a decal, and we'll set the standards really high and our expectations to get it that way, and we'll execute it as best as we can. But it is something we really have to think about, because we have to think that, you know, production friendly as well. You know, because like he was saying, you just can't have it keep floating around all the time. But yeah, I mean, it's really cool going back and forth though, because, you know, we get to dive into what, you know, we'll get reference from Lucasfilm and on. We get, you know, we have the props, or we're watching all that stuff, or sometimes we go get to visit, you know, places and be like, oh wow, this is what it looks like, and so cool, you know. So yeah.
And Tim, this might be the most digital aspect, right, of costuming, because you interact with the GAD a lot to create custom fabrics. Can you talk a little bit about that, please?
Yeah. Well, just being able to explore that, and again, you know, being here for 17 years, kind of really seeing how that has all evolved, the types of inks we use, and it's screen printing and dye sublimation, DTF and DGG, vinyl cuts. I mean, it's everything now that you can create on materials to really give this incredible sense of depth and dimension that we really couldn't have before. So it's wonderful working with our graphic arts team. They're phenomenal. Shout out to you guys. But you know, costumes these days, of course, are very elaborate, you could say. I mean, it's pretty rare you're going to find a lot of heroes in spandex anymore. Everything is printed like layer after layer, and then sometimes we'll get invited to the studios. We'll be able to see how the real things were done. So then our job is kind of like, okay, how do we scale this down? How do we make this a quarter scale thing? Is it possible to do this? Is it the right technique to do this? So yeah, a lot of it's working with graphics, and there's a lot of back and forth, of course, swatches and figuring out colors and all that stuff. Screen printing inks have come a tremendously long way, and the details are so fine and like just ridiculously sharp. It is really cool to be able to experiment with a lot of these things. Kylo Ren was a great example I mentioned earlier. Lucasfilm was very adamant about that costume looking exactly the way that it did, but in quarter scale. So that I was desperately trying to find the material that would give that same effect, and for the life of me, I couldn't. So we ended up going through graphics, and we ended up printing that thing, and it has a It was beautiful. It has a very particular luster to it, which Lucasfilm was adamant on matching to the film. So that was a really, really, really awesome project to work on. And I love anytime there's more deeper crossing of skills like that. It's really, really fun.
And a lot of those assets are used and reused in the packaging as well. We design, to fit the character, but also the character to fit the line. And oftentimes, that photography is on the box art as well, which you can see on some of the pieces we brought along for the raffle later in the back. Bernie, some of our pieces are illuminated, like lightsabers or Captain Rex smoke there. We do open lit studio lighting and cinematic lighting. Have you ever had to go back in and change or touch up a paint so that it looks good illuminated and not illuminated and lit different ways?
Yeah, so for instance, with the, Captain Rex there, right? That was painted first as, I want to paint it to make it look like there's explosions and smoke and, going through reference of that and what the decision was. And then it was, we want to have it lit.
So that came later, that idea?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
And then I was like,
Wait a
okay,
minute.
I'm going to paint it to make it look lit. So, we had to find the balance of having it look lit if it's off, still making it look good, phenomenal, to execute that and get it to look cool. And then, we want to have it lit, so it's got to look good being lit, because that affects everything else. So a lot of it was painting on like a transparent resin, or smoky or milky resin, so it's kind of intrinsic or kind of milky, so it's not very solid, so it gives that kind of intrinsic smoky look to it. And then when it comes to the fire, so yeah, that was a piece that was going back and forth, and it came out pretty cool, I thought.
Yeah.
Pretty
I love
cool
that
effect.
piece. All right. Second to last phase here, we definitely wanted to talk a little bit about multimedia. I think Sideshow is unique and special in that we have our own in-house team. We have 2 separate buildings completely dedicated to filming. They have an editing suite, they have a green screen, and they do some pretty amazing stuff. I mean, they do the usual stuff you'll see online, like unboxing videos, but they do a lot of collection videos, behind the scenes work, making of, time lapses, and it's some pretty sophisticated special effects. So I wanted to share with you all some of those videos. See the finished products.
Baba, Dr. Cornelius Evison, Gurinden, and Labria. Straight from the Mos Eisley Cantina, Sideshow presents the Scum and Villainy Collection. Highly detailed and articulated 6-scale figures. Perfect for recreating your favorite scenes or telling your own story. With Greedo, the big-eyed bounty hunter with his sights set on the prize. Ponda Baba and Dr. Cornelius Evison. He doesn't like you, and he doesn't like you either. Gurinden, the Imperial spy who lurks in the shadows. And Labria, the mysterious man with the devilish grin. You just watch yourself. They're wanted men. The Star Wars Scum and Villainy Collection. Each 12-inch figure sold separately.
It reminds me of those old toy commercials, huh?
Okay.
The old toy commercials.
And then just one more.
Sideshow presents the Boba Fett life-size bust. Created in partnership with Legacy Effects, this bust features careful paint application to recreate the distress and weathering on his ancestral armor. Boba Fett's helmet also has an articulated rangefinder, and his jetpack is mounted on his shoulders to complete his signature look. The digital chest plate and jetpack have additional light-up elements to add display options. Reclaim the armor and bring home the Boba Fett life-size bust today.
So we were very honored to work with Legacy Effects on that piece, and with Grogu and a few other pieces that we've developed. Will, can you tell us a little bit about the crossover between movie special effects and what we do and some of those collaborations we've had?
Yeah, there's a lot where our worlds cross over, and then there's things that make our worlds different. Legacy is one of the places that is a good place to cross over, because they know how to do things for movies, where the meshes can be open and there can be unfinished parts in the back and all that kind of stuff. But they also have to make practical effects, and so they have their own 3D printers and molding and all that kind of stuff. So it's really just an incredible honor and experience to work with them. I mean, that Grogu came from their molds. I mean, the ones that they developed, and that's why it's so amazingly accurate. But it's a lot of fun to work with a place like that.
It's very similar.
Yeah.
Like, very similar to what we do.
Yeah. They cross over a lot with us.
So we do a lot of behind-the-scenes collaborations, but also public-facing. And speaking of honors, we did a collaboration with the artist Daniel Arsham recently, and I'd like to share with you a little video about that.
The Star Wars canon places us in this period when we don't really know when we are. A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. My name is Daniel Arsham, and I am a visual artist. I've been an artist my whole life. I've worked with many different pop cultural icons and sort of projected them 10,000 years into the future. One of the most important things for me is to allow the work to sort of float in time. We don't quite know when the object is from, because it feels like something from our own life, but looks like an archaeological object. Is it from the past or is it from the future? George Lucas was so good at creating this period when we don't really know when we are. My work naturally, I think, sort of fits into that universe. I've always tried to make things that I wanted to see exist. The first version of this collaboration with Star Wars, I sort of made for myself, like, what would I want, right, as an object? And also bring in new fans to my universe. So this is the first edition that I'm releasing with Sideshow. It took a while to get here, figure out all the mechanics around achieving this at this scale. I've collected Star Wars toys since I was a kid, but Sideshow has a different level of collector. It's been helpful to have their kind of insight. The reaction was amazing. I think people are excited about looking at the Star Wars universe through my lens and having a different take on it. It's been a great experience. The art world is very gate-kept. But I've never wanted to make work that was just about the art world. It needed to be work that was for everyone and speaks to everyone.
So it was very cool to get the opportunity to kind of bridge the fine art world with the pop culture world and really serve a whole new fan base. Like we, at the start of this presentation, we're talking about how Star Wars is generational and really has become and transcended pop culture. So this was a really cool project for the team to get to work on that. It had some interesting challenges. But we work with all sorts of different artists, and there's always different unique challenges to those projects as well. And some of the artists we work with are painters or graffiti artists, and it presents some unique challenges. Like this piece we did with Mab Graves, she's an oil painter, and we reproduced one of her Ewoks. Will, do you want to talk a little bit about the challenge of translating her drawing, and particularly fur, and how we kind of captured that?
Yeah, I've joked that fur is the part of sculpting, as many of you probably know, that makes you want to take your own life. It can be super challenging, but with working with particular artists, it's really neat. It's a challenge, but it's the specific challenge of being a sculptor. Really, is to bring something into the 3D world that wasn't there before. I mean, we do things from movies and places like that often, but some of the most challenging and fulfilling sculpting is when you are bringing that thing that people love that has only ever existed in 2D into 3D. It tests you and challenges you, and like I said, it can be a lot of fun. And especially if the artist is into it. Oftentimes, these 2D artists have never seen their pieces in 3D, and so they're really excited, and you can feed each other's enthusiasm that way. And so if they're behind it and really into it, it really gives you a lot of energy, and you want to bring it to life for them.
And Will's wife painted this piece, which is it's extra little shout out to Kat. That was amazing. Bernie, can you talk a little bit about interpreting the work of the urban Aztec?
Yeah, because, graffiti, right? I mean, old stomping grounds, but, that's in the past, but whatever. So that was challenging because, it's graphic. It's just right in your face. It's on a wall. Colors, you do your color base, then you go ahead and outline with a dark outline. So one of the challenging things was making sure the sculptors had that edge, and then going in to make sure that the black lines were there for Urban Aztec to do his work. So, going back and forth. I remember the first one we did was Wolverine, and I was able to do the black lines on that one and do the shadow, with the harsh block out lines. And I was like, this is really cool that we're able to execute this piece and make it look like it was a piece of 2D art, like it was his artwork bouncing off the page. And so it was great to collaborate with him on that. Very cool.
That's a fun piece. All right. Well, we'll open up to some Q&A in a minute, but before we do, we just wanted to rewind the clock and leave you with a piece of career advice each.
I'm so sorry.
Oh, man.
It's terrible. Devastating.
Yeah.
That's when I was 7. No, I'm joking.
And I'll go first quickly, but I would recommend that you all take one business class. I've worked with a lot of different creatives and a lot of different creative directors throughout my career, and the most effective ones are those that have an understanding of business. And instead of going into a meeting with your great idea for a Grogu and saying, Grogu is cool, I have a cool idea for a Grogu, it's got, pockets or whatever your special idea is, the people that are able to go in and set up a business case, talk about efficiencies in production, talk about edition size, talk about a little bit about the marketplace and what it's ready for. That sets up the pitch for the cool Grogu to see much greater success. Alternately, it's important to understand things like how to write your own invoices and send those invoices in. When you're freelancing, how to set a rate for your time and your hours and your materials. So just a basic course in business can really set you up for some long-term success in the art world. All right, Will, you want to give us some sculpting advice? That will probably be a lot more exciting than that.
My biggest piece of career advice is utterly irrelevant to this group, which is don't wait until you're 35 to try to do what you want to do. Luckily, most of you are young and here in school, and you've figured out how to not wait that long. So I guess the second piece would be to keep learning, because you can find what you want to do really late in life. And if you embrace the growth and the learning, you can be young again. And that's really been the blessing of my life, is to to be doing what I love, even though it took me a long time to find it, and keep learning, keep looking at the different programs, and it's easy to be excited in this time, in this world that we live. So embrace that.
Me?
Yeah, you.
Oh. Yeah, so, I've been doing this for a long time, and there's been times when I thought, what am I doing? What's gonna, how is this gonna turn out for me? Because, did art as a kid, played with toys, and, I found my niche. And I'm so blessed to say that as an artist, you wanna do your work, you wanna do your art, but think of that as your passion, right? Your passion, and you're like, how am I gonna do this in life? And for me, it was always, I think for me, the money is a byproduct. Study, learn, like he said, and take critique. It's, when you're working like with the team with us, we've all checked our egos at the door. And you have to remember that you're only as good as your last piece, or, you grow more when you start hearing like, you know what, this could be done this way, this could be that way, and be like, you know what, okay, I accept that, because what I'm here to do is work as a team, execute it, and then guess what? We all done our job, what we were here to do, and I'm just so blessed to be here, because I've been here, like I said, 20 years, and it was it was hard work, but that's what does it, is passion, hard work, believe in yourself, take critique from others. I'm telling you right now, that's like the one thing, that I think as all of us there at Sideshow is we work so well together. I think that's why we've grown so much, I mean, we keep learning off each other all the time, and it's like a family there. I should, excuse my language, but I'm just so passionate about this because I want people to understand that you can find what you want, and it's just being able to open yourself up. And yeah, I mean, that's it for me,
That's beautiful.
Well, now that I'm exposed with my Jedi robe up here, I will say the reason that picture even exists is because that was the summer in '99 when The Phantom Menace came out, and I was 16 years old. And we were looking at the Time magazine photo shoot, and I loved the costumes there, and I thought it was beautiful. So I said, Mom, can you teach me how to sew? I want to take my senior portrait in a Jedi robe and look like a giant asshole, and it worked out great. So that's my first thing I ever sewed at all, and I did it with my mom step by step. But I will say, advice-wise, you guys are going to be tremendously talented when you leave here, each in your different aspects. You already know to learn everything you can, but for me, I never would have thought doing something like I do and have been doing would have been an option. So be open, because sometimes that career path is not going to look anything like you envision, or anything like you hope, or anything that you dream. But there's a lot of opportunities that could come your way. Obviously, you guys are all, or I'm sure several of you are friends, connected. I know there's a lot of wonderful connective threads here to various industries across the board. Technology is changing rapidly, but I would say, as someone who never ever thought that making a Jedi robe at 16, I would be here on stage speaking to a group, having been at Sideshow for 17 years. And it's really been an incredible journey, and there's been so much growth and learning, and the collaboration, the teamwork part is phenomenal, truly. It's incredible, and it's constantly inspiring all the time. We have people like touring around Sideshow. We've met we've met celebrities and directors, producers, all kinds of people behind the scenes, special effects legends. I mean, they come and it's remarkable how in awe they are just walking through the studio. And it's really quite humbling, to be honest.
It's very humbling.
Yeah, it's incredible, truly. But we live in this really amazing space of being in between the film industry and a comic industry, and television and video games, and all of this stuff kind of comes together, and Sideshow gets to create these things in 3D for people who love to collect. And that's really what the core of the business is. But if I were to tell you anything, be open to your future, because it could really be any number of things that might surprise you.
Oh, wait, and one more.
Yep.
Can I add one more?
Sure.
Have
Please
patience.
do.
Have patience.
Have patience.
Don't, it's going to take time. It's going to take time to get good. And not, I'm not saying good, but better, because artists are our own worst critic, right? I mean, but beat yourself up, but get yourself back up, because that's what's going to get you better. Failing is going to make you better. I will say that right now.
Agreed. Well said.
All right. Well, I think we have some time for some questions, if there are any.
Oh, perfect. Okay, so you all know how this works. We kind of keep it mental. You can keep your hands up. So we'll do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in the back, all right? And that'll start off our first 6, and then if you have questions as we go, you can raise your hand. Does that sound good? All right.
All right, cool. Thank you guys very much. My question is about, given all the work and care that goes into the creation of these figures and these first initial versions of it, how do you maintain that quality when you're working with your manufacturing partners and this is scaled to hundreds or thousands of these being made?
Well, we have some staff that are dedicated to exactly that. And they travel to other countries and meet with our partners there. We do have an overseas team that is also on site. But really, there's only a handful of manufacturing partners we have in the world that manufacture at the quality we do, with the level of certifications that we need. And it's a back and forth process. One of my favorite rooms at the office is the production room, and you can walk in and you can see our handmade prototype on the shelf, and it's almost like that Sesame Street game where you're like, one of these things is not like the other, and you can kind of look, and at first glance you're like, oh, there's 3 or 4 rays, but then you notice that ray has weird, her blush isn't right, or this or that and the other, and there's people that do that for a living until they get to a level of quality that we feel is acceptable, and that's when we say go. But I do have to also say the team of artists are so diligent and so understanding of those processes that sometimes they dial back and, well, I shouldn't say dial back, they adjust their techniques to be more manufacturing friendly, so that we know we can get to the level of quality that we feel we need to uphold as a brand. I don't know if you guys want to add any specific examples to that. But
No, you're right on. Choosing the right partner is a huge part of it, and then working towards
Well,
what
getting
is
samples,
possible.
like we'll have 3 samples sent to us until it's done, to like
Or
we
more.
agreed upon to, or more.
Sure, yeah.
But it's going back and forth, and I mean, there's times I'm walking by the production room, like I look by, I'm like, why is the prototype in there? I'm like, wait a minute. So then I go back and it's like, whoa, that's a production piece. Like, wow, it's really amazing. The level of our partners that we've been with for years. I mean, this is not something new. I mean, so we do have a relationship with them for a long, long time. So we have that advantage, and they get us. So.
And they are extraordinary artists.
Oh, yeah.
What they do is just crazy. I mean,
Thank you all for your time and insights. I had a design and sculpting question. When you have a single character that's maybe portrayed by 2 or more different actors at, say, different ages, do you ever intentionally avoid not having a perfect likeness to the actor and tweak some features in order to unify the look, to unify the character?
That's a great question, because that's actually something that we talk about a lot. Another way to think about what you're saying is, what degree of stylization do we allow into something like a portrait? Because maybe it's not, between ages, but it's, sometimes a person is, how do I say this? They look more like them, especially, as a scaled version, if it's not exactly them. I mean, in other words, you don't caricature necessarily, but you enhance the themness. And so, we did some, but it's a very fine line, because if you go too far, then you're either into the uncanny valley, or it does look like a caricature. So it's a constant thing, and how we approach it most often is iterations. We try it, look at it, paint it, review it, see what we think, oftentimes change it, and go through the whole process again. So
And that's a really good question for a number of reasons, but I want to steer you and Bernie towards a specific example. It's not entirely up to us either. Oftentimes we're working with a licensor or a studio partner. They have a vision in mind or they don't have a vision in mind, which makes it very challenging. But the example that comes to mind that I'd love for you guys to talk about is we worked with a certain group of, I'm going to leave them unnamed, musicians who wore a lot of makeup. And even though we had their exact face scans for Will to work from, the image they had in their mind is not what they actually looked like. They were thinking of their Instagram makeup images. And so throughout that iteration, we kind of eventually came to that. But you did so many different changes. And then the paint itself, like the amount of contouring that makeup can do. I mean, I don't know if you guys, do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, oh no, this is something that I was thinking about while you were talking about doing likenesses, that you can actually sculpt in paint. I mean, like, we've all seen the videos on YouTube where someone, a person will give themselves makeup and look like a completely different person, like, I look like Clint Eastwood now or something.
Yeah.
And so sometimes you're required to adjust the sculpt in paint.
Yeah, I think it's basically adding the drama maybe. For a good example, I mean, let's say Batman, Christian Bale Batman, right? The cowl. You have this much of Christian Bale. And I'm like, I got to make that look like Christian Bale. So now, again, it's reference. But I remember painting, like, does that look like Christian Bale? He's got a cowl on. What am I doing? But that's where it's really cool you start to finite and focus, and that's where the experience comes in. You start to, it's going to take trial and tribulations. It's going to fail. And then finally it's like, oh yeah, it does look like, let's say, Ben Affleck when he did his Batman, or Christian Bale. Like, you did that one little part, but you got to add the drama in there to make it look like the character. Because not necessarily the sculpt is that's just who is that, and then finally you start painting in there, and you start seeing all the nuances that they have in their face and mapping out everything, and you're like, that does look like them.
Did you notice we totally ignored where you were
okay.
trying to steer us because it was such a traumatic experience?
That
was that. But then there's
Good job, guys.
It was a better example.
Hello? Okay. So I'm curious. When it comes to like cloths, like making like clothing and cloths, like sculpting, for like, let's say for like when it does like it's going like some sort of like dynamic action. Do you sometimes do either cloth simulation, or like sometimes you would have to like manually like sculpt the clothing, like have it like use like a tool to like bend the clothing, especially like effects, like do you have to like some sort of program that like does some sort of special effects and like do like modeling in there, or do you have to like sometimes like maybe like model the whole effect from scratch with sculpting?
Yes, all that. It depends on the situation, and it depends on the intent of the design. But when it comes to Marvelous Designer can build you this great foundation. But like, for example, for us, we have to pose all these things and freeze that pose. And that's really the biggest weakness that I've found for Marvelous Designer. It's not very pose friendly. And we have to freeze a pose. We're trying to freeze a moment, and usually a really dramatic moment. So for whatever it's worth, a little trick I do is I usually sculpt, let's say it's a cape, and it's got to be, it's a big cape that's wrapping around and flowing in the breeze. I'll sculpt it by hand first, get all that dynamism and flow, and then I'll just pose my Marvelous Designer one draped over that that armature. And I was like, and that actually gets you pretty close pretty quick. So, little trick.
My question was, I'm going in for the character artist track here at Gnomon. So obviously ZBrush and sculpting is like a big part of my life now, and I love it. So I even invested into 3D printing and all this figurine stuff. It's freaking awesome. What I never understood, obviously with 3D printers getting like way better, and I don't have a bad one either. What's the purpose of molding and casting? I never understood like What do you get out of that, out of just working right off the printer, priming it, and painting it?
You're right on. We're right at that period of time where the cost difference is starting to get competitive. In the past, the reason, I mean, and I say the past, this is only the last 10 years because, you know, at some point, 3D printers didn't exist. But recently, the cost of a 3D print is getting low enough to compete with a molded piece. But really the reason that you would mold it is because you can make so many more copies so much cheaper. And that's really the main difference. Right now, as a matter of fact, we mold less and less every year and print more and more because the cost is better. I mean, not long ago.
Materials,
yeah,
like
yeah.
mold, the silicone.
Yeah, yeah.
The
So
resin.
they're getting
Sure,
very competitive. But not long ago, maybe 5-6 years ago, we had one single piece that was printed, and it was quite, sorry, I don't know if I'm allowed to say, but it was freaking expensive to print. One copy was like half of a person's salary for a year for one copy. Obviously, to mold it is, you know, a tiny fraction of that. Now you could have that same piece printed for a couple $1,000 bucks.
And you can have multiple parts printed, where in mold and cast, you mold it, right? You cast the resin, you pull out the piece, it didn't, you know, it didn't get casted right, there's bubbles in it, so now you gotta go back. So it's just so much simplified now. It's just easier and quicker, so.
But it was really
which is crazy to think about, yeah.
Yeah, it was cost.
Yeah. And time.
Yeah.
Now.
Yeah, right.
We're getting stuff like.
Yeah, for prototyping.
Really cool.
The production process still will go through the mold and cast, because replicating, you know, that in that quantity also is.
But I would even say.
Stay tuned though. In a few years.
Yeah, I mean, even
every piece you get might be printed.
Even in effects industry, I think mold and cast has slowed down
Less
a
and
little bit.
less,
I mean, silicone and all that, but you know, prototyping, just print it out.
Another difference is you can cast in many different materials. So if you need them to be flexible and you can print in different materials now too, but not quite as conveniently. So those are a couple of reasons.
Well, first off, thank you for taking the time to talk to us, and it's been really cool to see your guys' process and how you make the cool things that you guys make. So my question was, you guys kind of talked about some of the things that might make the creative process a little more challenging, whether it's for fishnets or final changes. So my question is, when it comes to Star Wars, what is the character or item that you are the most excited to work on? And secondly, what is the one that you know might be a little daunting?
These are things that have happened or might happen? Both? Go for it.
We can't say.
Yeah, because we're doing it right now?
Sorry. But
we're like 2 days early to talk about this one, but
So May the
we're
4th
gonna
is
have
Are we all in
Sunday.
agreement on that?
Stay tuned.
We're all thinking of the same piece? The one that's
I
going
think
to
so.
Okay, yeah, okay, yeah.
isn't it great, guys? Greatest piece we've ever done.
I like holding this. I like holding the carrot over them.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry.
I
Just
guess
tuned
fine.
in.
I don't know. What can you say about it?
One of my favorite pieces, just for what it's worth, was Cad Bane. I worked on the animated Cad Bane, and that was a lot of fun.
That was
a dream piece. I grew up with the spaghetti westerns and stuff like that, and Star Wars, as I mentioned, and he was just this awesome nexus of the two. So that was a dream piece for me.
Yeah. And mine too. I painted that one. So.
Oh, there you go. That's right. Yeah.
And that was awesome to do. You know, that was just the textures, the fabrics, painting the dust to make it look like dust, and just all the little nuances. That was a great collaboration.
Yeah, that was a big one. Yeah. Mine would be probably the Obi-Wan that was featured pretty heavily in this. And I get, that one has a story in its own. I don't know if you're familiar with the original piece Sideshow did over a decade ago, 2011, I think it was released, but that was a 5th scale, fully sculpted, beautiful statue. And then we did a 6th scale one, and then I was waiting, and we finally got the opportunity to do the 1/4 scale one, and that was challenging on so many levels. But that honestly, this one and the one coming up are my two top, honestly.
And the Obi-Wan was exciting because of the show.
Right? Yeah, exactly.
So that was coming out, and then the promotional shot of him.
Yeah.
Right, with the saber out, and I was like, oh, look at that.
Yeah,
we kind of influenced
that, really
there.
cool.
Yeah, that was really cool. So.
Yeah, yep. That original piece was a big influence for the director of the show, which she had mentioned in an interview, which is really cool for all. I mean, we were all pretty
And
excited
then
about that.
J.J. Abrams has the first one.
Yes,
The first
yeah,
one
yeah,
was-
the first one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which was incredible because I was able to work on all those three. So
Oh, yeah.
back in the day, working on that first one, and what I learned in paint at that time, growing to get it to what this one is, you know what I mean? So, and to bring that to I mean, because trying to get the fabrics right and trying to get the weathering right and what he looked like and the story that we're telling with ourselves
Yeah.
to get that across, you know, the textures, the fabrics, and having a miniature Obi-Wan or Mace, anything like that in your collection is pretty cool, you know.
Yeah, I had a question for Will. So you said you block out your sculpt in Maya, and just wondering, do you use the sculpting brushes in Maya? And for posing, do you use like a joint rig?
I actually don't use any of the sculpting brushes in Maya. I don't know why, I just find them to be kind of awkward. If I need to sculpt something, I'll just send it to ZBrush. But I go back and forth a ridiculous number of times. I'll just, it just, you know, it's not a one-way street for me. I'll send it back to Maya, I'll do something to it, I'll send it back to ZBrush, blah, 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 blah. But for posing, yeah, I have a really, really crappy rig setup. It's all just hierarchical. I don't use, you know, joints and stuff like that. It's just, basically, I started off making action figures, you know, digital action figures, and that's what I do to pose. Everything's cut up, you know, cut at the joints, and 'cause I figure I'm gonna have to repair all that stuff anyway, so why not just make it quick? It's super intuitive for me to pose that way, because, you know, I've been posing action figures since I was 6. So yeah, that's my personal way. I'm not sure I would recommend doing it that way, but that's the way I learned, and it's hard to change.
All right, we have one final question right here for you all.
Hello, and I know all three of you mentioned teamwork, and each one of you are specialized with a part of the piece. How is it that that all departments communicate with each other to a way that another would understand? Because it's one thing, say if I'm, say like as a costume designer, if the leg's too long, is it something that you just say, the leg's too long, fix it? Or is there a specific way to say it to your, so then the other, so the person working who does that work understands better?
That's a great question. We have a bit of a sibling kind of relationship probably sometimes,
Yes.
you know, where it's like, dude, what the F, man? I mean, come on. So I think we can be a little bit that way, but also you want to be careful because we're all invested in these pieces. So, you know, it's a little.
But I think it's communication, and we've all grown to know each other, but we've accepted the fact that we're not the final say-all. You know, we got to have someone else who says, hey, this is not working. Okay, well, you know, we got to make it work. So at the end of the day, we're all here as a team. We got to make sure it flows well together. So
Lots
it's
of
accepting,
conversations.
a lot of conversations, but that's the beauty of this whole thing. You know, that's why this has worked so long, is because we're able to collaborate, and we do. I mean, we love going to work. I mean, we're messing around all the time, but you know, it's just cool that he's in one department, I'm in one department.
Our boss is here, don't say that too.
But yeah, I mean, you know, so.
I think, I mean, with that sort of a thing, structure, kind of remember structure is important because if we're talking about a particular piece, something that needs attention, every project has a project manager, for example. So, you know, oftentimes, years ago, we'd kind of float around departments and be like, hey, this is an issue, this is a problem. And by the time I'm getting in and work on it, Will could be, you know, 2 projects down from where he had sculpted the original piece that I'm working on. So I think for us, you have to structurally find a way to be like, okay, project manager, you know, we have like Basecamp set up, which is like an online depository of all the information. So we'll know like, hey, this is an issue, let's address this, we'll need it by X amount of time. So I think that's an important part of it too. It's not necessarily us You know,
No,
I'm not running over to Bernie and be like, dude, you suck at painting.
Yes,
I don't know if
no,
anybody
no.
told you that.
No,
it's not quite like that, but
no.
you know what I mean. So
Yeah, it is
we will joke
structure.
with each other in this
It
way.
is
but
structure.
Structure
I
is
mean,
really important, honestly.
The
when it
base
comes to
camp
teamwork.
is each project is there.
Yeah.
And
We're watching it
everyone
come toward
we're
us and then watching it after it
everyone's
leaves us.
watching
Exactly.
the problems that arise on that base camp
Yep.
or how fluid it's going.
Yeah.
And so the red flags are coming up, and that's where the
Yeah,
communication is.
you're seeing something while it's in Sculpt,
Yes.
and you can
Precisely,
raise
yeah.
a
We can
flag.
call it,
yeah,
yeah.
that's,
Sure.
that's,
And for, again, you know, my specific needs, if something isn't Sculpt and I'm seeing it, it hasn't been 3D printed yet, we'll have time to be like, hey, you know, this leg is bent a little bit too much. Can we get something cut out here? Or can we shift this key a little bit more down? You know, so those things all come, and we do have, like, you know, a process by which to do that. It's not necessarily just us, you know, kind of ribbing each other about something. You know,
I
it's
would
really
add there's
important.
no substitute for in-person communication, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's great to have base camp, and sometimes it's easier, especially if it's a semi-confrontational conversation, to ask someone to change something, or
Sure.
if you disagree, it's easier to shoot them like a quick chat or an email, but the context is lost, and that's where people start to like read into it the wrong way, because everything we all do is so personal and we love it so much. And when you're face to face with someone, it's so much easier to have those conversations, and they go so much more smoothly. And you know, COVID was really challenging for us to all be separate, and
Yes.
we really felt the loss of that in-person communication. So being on site, and all of our off-site staff regularly come in, and it's like little family reunions to have them. So I mean, I've seen you guys have made up words and shorthand, but there's no substitute for environment and being in the same room together.
Yes.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much. Give another round of applause for
All right,
Sideshow. But I believe we're not done yet. I believe you have just even more for us. You've already been so giving this entire evening, but I think there's even more. Why don't you walk us through what's about to happen next here?
Well, we have 2 copies of our Art of Star Wars book, and this is 30 years worth of Star Wars product. No one asked the question, like, how do you do Luke Skywalker differently over 30 years? So if you want to know, the answers are in this book. Plus, the team was nice enough to all sign it, including artists that couldn't make it. So we have 2 of those to give away, as well as an Ahsoka Tano premium format figure that's quarter scale, and a Mace Windu with Tim's lovely cut and sew handiwork on it. So we could pull 4 raffle tickets for those?
Awesome. We could definitely pull 4 raffle tickets. And then for the people watching at home,
Yes. So we didn't want to leave you all out. And you guys can do that here too. We have a QR code for an online giveaway for the book, and also our awesome Mandalorian and Grogu PF, which is one of my personal favorites, because the engineering feat to get that floating baby in the pram is like magical.
So here's what we'll do. For those of you at home, and I see some of you over here scanning, make sure that you enter right here, scan this QR code, so that way you can enter. For those of you here, don't move. We're going to go ahead and do the giveaway for you live. But for those of you at home, it's here. Scan it. Good luck to you. Again, I can't scan it, so I'll give you my luck back at home. Thank you again to Sideshow Collectibles. If you're curious on what Gnomon can do for you, go ahead and contact us at gnomon.edu. Go ahead and follow us on all of our socials at gnomon_school. And we'll see you next time. Let's give it a round of applause for the live stream audience. We'll see y'all.
It's beautiful. Beautiful.
Nope. Oh, there we are. Okay. Now we're back here. Now it's just us, y'all. No more camera.